Hey everyone, AJ here, and welcome back to another weapon ranking. This time we're going to cover C0 Kazuha, more specifically Support Kazuha. If you just want to see the rankings, then feel free to skip ahead, timestamps are in the description, but as always I have to fill you in on what assumptions are behind these calculations. Now when I say Support Kazuha, I mostly refer to his playstyle, which is swapping over to Kazuha, using his abilities, and swapping right back out to your other units. Within this playstyle, you can either aim to increase his swirl and reaction damage, or his personal damage that comes from his ability multipliers. In the first case, you stack Elemental Mastery on him, in the second case you go for the usual DPS stats, attack, crit, and damage percent bonuses. Then again, these two are just the two opposite ends of one spectrum, and everything in the middle is obviously also possible. Maybe you just want a certain amount of EM and invest the rest of your stats in his ability damage. At the core though, Swirl Kazuha and Ability Damage Kazuha each deserve their own weapon ranking, because they're trying to do very different things that have nothing to do with each other in terms of stats. Swirls and other transformative reactions only care about character level and EM, and Ability Damage only cares about attack, crit, and damage percent bonuses. If all you want to do is maximize swirl damage and the team buffs that Kazuha provides with no regard whatsoever for his own damage, then the weapon ranking is pretty simple and doesn't require any math at all. The more EM you have, the better, and with that the ranking would look something like this. Freedom Sworn, Iron Sting, Dark Iron Sword, and then Alley Flash. If none of these are an option for you, or you think you have enough EM already, then the next best stat to go for is Energy Recharge. And with that, the ranking would continue with Sacrificial Sword as the best ER weapon, because not only does it give you a ton of ER, it also gives you more swirls in total because of the cooldown reset passive. Then comes the Favonius sword, although it could be hard to trigger its passive since you won't have much crit rate at all when you're approaching 1000 EM, followed by Skyward Blade, then Festering Desire, and lastly Skyrider Sword. So this would be the easiest but also still efficient approach to building Kazuha. Most players seem to be building him full EM, and with good reason. Now I'm not here to judge which build is better, as I don't have a complete answer to that yet. I'm still in the middle of doing my own little tests, but the fact is that I'm simply more interested in scaling his personal damage, and that's where we get into the next weapon ranking, the one I actually want to show you today. The ranking you're about to see is based on my own calculations, link to the original spreadsheet is in the description, and here's all the background info you need to know. First of all, this ranking only cares about ability damage and does not account for resistances and reactions. To calculate the performance of different weapons, I assumed a rotation of about 15 seconds in length, consisting of one burst, one hold version of his elemental skill, and one tap version of his elemental skill. The ordering here is mostly irrelevant except for certain weapons. Kazuha, as well as all weapons, were assumed to be at level 90, all of Kazuha's talents were assumed to be at level 8, constellations were not considered, the artifact set was assumed to be the 4-piece Viridescent Venerer set, artifact main stats were attack percent, animal damage, and either crit rate or crit damage depending on the weapon. Artifact substats followed a 15 out of 25 approach, which means that all 5 artifacts come with the 3 desirable damage related substats, attack percent, crit rate, and crit damage at base. And then out of 5 available upgrades for each artifact, 3 of those go into either of these 3 stats. This means that overall, out of 25 upgrades in total, 15 go into useful stats. These substats were then allocated correctly to reach a 1:2 crit ratio on every single weapon. What that results in is a very high investment artifact setup over which we then compare different weapons, and since each weapon is granted its own optimal substat distribution, what we're basically ranking here is the performance of weapons at their peak. As for weapon-specific assumptions, Aquila's passive was assumed to proc once per rotation. Summit Shaper only gets an average of 2 stacks, since it's hard to build any with such little field time. However, with a shielded bonus on top, as you'd probably be running a shield unit together with this weapon. With the upcoming Mistsplitter, you're only able to get 2 stacks at most, unless you have C6 Kazuha, or you choose to infuse with Bennett or Chongyun, so for this calculation it was at 2 stacks. With this weapon, you do want to mind the sequencing of your abilities and go with your ultimate first to get both stacks, then do a tap E so that by the time you do your second E, you still have both stacks active. Lion's Roar gets a 90% passive uptime to account for the occasional bit of downtime, but keep in mind that this passive only works in Electro and Pyro comps. The buff on the new Freedom Sword was assumed to have a 60% uptime, since it lasts for 12 seconds on a 20-second cooldown. Iron Sting only gets 1 stack going on average, since by the time you build 2, you've already swapped out again. Unless otherwise stated, Blackcliff Longsword was assumed to have 1 stack active at all times, and Harbinger of Dawn's passive was assumed to be active as well. Royal Longsword gets a flat 3% bonus crit to account for its passive that's very difficult to calculate correctly, despite having little impact. The Alley Flash got a 90% uptime on its passive, possibly a bit optimistic because it requires you to not get hit, but with a shield it should be doable. The prototype Rancour and the Flute are stuck at 0 stacks at all times, since we're not doing charged or normal attacks at all on Support Kazuha. And now with all of that out of the way, let's finally look at the results. Unsurprisingly, maybe, Jade Cutter leads the list, closely followed by the upcoming Mistsplitter. This weapon would be better than Jade Cutter if Kazuha had a way of reliably getting that 3rd stack. Summon Shaper makes it into the top 3, followed by Aquila Favonia, but neither of these two have a chance against the top 2 even with refinements. Then we have Lion's Roar, very close to Aquila Favonia, which makes it one of the best 4-star weapons for Kazuha, but it forces you into certain team compositions. Without its passive, it's basically like running a flute. After that is the new Freedom Sword, followed by Harbinger of Dawn, the first free-to-play friendly option on this list, but a risky one as well. If you fall below 90% HP, it's one of the worst weapon options out there, but maybe you're a fan of the additional challenge, and with how little field time Kazuha requires, you may just be fine with this weapon, especially if you give him a shield. Its performance is on the same level as Blackcliff though, and even though for Blackcliff you have to spend some star glitter, it's technically also free to play and much more consistent. It also has the potential to be much stronger than Harbinger, because if you do manage to get 3 stacks on this weapon, it's right up there with all the 5 stars. Then again, against high health targets without any stacks, it's nothing special. Royal Longsword is the other star glitter weapon, and if you have to choose between these two, always take Blackcliff. It's simply better and doesn't fall off as your gear gets better like Royal does. The Black Sword is a very mediocre weapon for Kazuha specifically, because its passive doesn't do anything for him. The same is true for the Flute. The new Amenoma sword deserves some attention though, because it will most likely be the new craftable weapon that comes with Inazuma, which would make it the best craftable sword for Kazuha, and also the best truly free-to-play weapon if you've never ever participated in the gacha system. It also helps with energy, so to me it seems like a very well-balanced weapon. Then we have the LA Flash, followed by Skyward Blade, whose passive is sadly also useless, except for the small bonus to crit rate. After that we have Festering Desire at Refinement 5, and then the prototype Rancour, whose secondary stat and passive are entirely wasted on Kazuha. Iron Sting is even weaker than the prototype because of the lower base attack, but it becomes better with some refinements. And then lastly we have the energy recharge weapons Favonius and Sacrificial Sword. Sacrificial becomes much better with refinements, as you're able to recast your elemental skill more and more reliably, but double casting also means spending more time on the field that could be spent on your carries. So that concludes the basic weapon ranking for Kazuha, but just to give you an impression of how things change once you add buffs to the mix, I'll show you the same weapon ranking but with an active Bennett ultimate that gives 1000 flat attack. And as always, once you add a large amount of external attack, crit weapons become much better, and attack weapons become much worse because of diminishing returns. Jade Cutter and Mistsplitter are still at the top because they're both crit weapons on top of being 5 stars. And you can see that there's a large gap between these two and rank 3, which happens to be Harbinger of Dawn. The biggest drawback of Harbinger of Dawn is its low base attack, but once you cover that up with a nice Bennett ultimate, it becomes one of the best weapons in the game. Still risky, but very powerful. Lion's Roar is now better than Aquila, and still the best 4-star given the right team comp, with Blackcliff being the second best 4-star. With 3 stacks it becomes even better. Now before I finish this video, I want to let you know that you can also make your own personalized weapon ranking that takes into account your specific artifacts and team compositions. All you need to do is go to the spreadsheet linked in the description, make your own copy, and now you can play with whatever you'd like to change. You can toggle all kinds of buffs, play with uptimes on buffs and weapon passives, you can add resonances, you can change artifact set effects, you can change artifact main stats, enter your own artifact substats, and the thing about this sheet is that all of the changes you make are immediately reflected in this weapon ranking. So if you want to be absolutely sure which weapon is the best for you, then I recommend you do that. That, however, suggests that you already have an idea which artifact pieces you're going to use. And if you aren't sure about that yet, because maybe you have similar artifacts but don't know which configuration is best, then I recommend you head over to Genshin Optimizer, which is a very handy tool that configures the best artifact setup for you. You can optimize for EM if that's what you want to do, or you can optimize for ability damage. You can even set a minimum amount of elemental mastery for your Kazuha while still optimizing for ability damage. So for example, if you cannot live with anything under 400 elemental mastery, then you can add that here and the tool will only spit out builds that satisfy this EM requirement. If you're not sure how to use this tool, then I'll leave a link in the description to a guide made by Jinx on just that topic. Anyway, that's it for this video. I hope it was of some use to you. If you have any questions or feedback, please let me know. I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe to my channel. And other than that, thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.